The festival stage lights blazed like interrogation lamps, and Nia Hartwell stood at the microphone, knowing that her next words would either free her or bury her family's secret forever. Madame Ryu Gyeongja's smile was sharp as winter glass, her whispered command still echoing. Sing the lullaby, the borrowed song. The melody that had lived in Nia's chest since childhood, carried from her mother's voice like a promise wrapped in mystery. Behind Madame Ryu, cameras rolled for the local news. The Koreatown Cultural Festival stretched in all directions, food stalls steaming, children laughing, families celebrating under October sun. A perfect backdrop for legitimacy, a perfect trap. Ryu Dae-hyun stood 3 feet away, his jaw tight with the kind of tension that came from watching your world balance on a knife's edge. 2 weeks ago, he'd been just another powerful man in an expensive suit. Now he was the man who'd offered Nia a contract that treated her like a person instead of a prop, and who was about to lose everything because of it. Nia lifted the microphone, her voice carrying over the festival crowd. "My name is Nia Hartwell," she said, each word deliberate as a heartbeat. "I'm a waitress, I'm a singer, I'm a daughter, and I'm tired of people deciding who matters based on who has money." Madame Ryu's smile froze. The crowd quieted, sensing the shift from celebration to confrontation. Nia's next words would either crown Dae-hyun as his family's legitimate heir, or destroy him for choosing accountability over obedience. She made her choice. Nia Hartwell learned early that survival in Los Angeles required 3 things: excellent peripheral vision, the ability to carry 4 plates without dropping them, and a voice that could cut through noise without begging for attention. At 26, she'd mastered all 3. The morning shift at Hanok Garden started like every other, Jules Tanaka briefing the staff with military precision, the kitchen already steaming with prep work, and Nia pinning her locks into a low professional roll that wouldn't brush plates or invite comments from customers who thought her hair was their business. "Private event tonight," Jules announced, his tone carrying the weight of rent money. "Upstairs dining room, high-profile guests, no mistakes, no lingering, no small talk." Nia nodded along with the other servers. High profile in Koreatown usually meant money that didn't ask questions and didn't like being asked any in return. What Jules didn't mention, what he never mentioned, was that Hanok Garden sat exactly 2 blocks from the open mic lounge where Nia sang 3 nights a week, where she transformed from background service into foreground power, where her voice belonged to her and no one else. The lunch rush blurred past in the familiar rhythm of order-taking and plate balancing. Nia moved through the dining room like water, efficient and nearly invisible. The way good servers learned to be. She caught fragments of conversation, business deals, family gossip, the casual cruelty of people who'd forgotten that staff had ears. Around 4 o'clock, as the afternoon lull settled over the restaurant, Malik Rowe appeared at the service entrance with his usual grin and a messenger bag full of audio cables. "Sound check in an hour," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Malik was 28, a freelance sound engineer who treated Nia's open mic nights like they were Madison Square Garden. "You ready for tonight?" Nia wiped down a table, her movements automatic. "Always ready." "You nervous about the new song?" Nia paused. The new song, the one she'd been working on for weeks, built around a melody that had lived in her chest since childhood. Her mother's borrowed lullaby, transformed into something that belonged to Nia alone. "Not nervous," she said. "Just, it feels important." Malik's expression softened. He'd been her best friend since they'd met at a community college music program 5 years ago, back when they'd both believed talent was enough to change everything. Now they knew better. Talent was the starting point. Everything else was strategy, luck, and the stubborn refusal to let the world make you smaller. "Important's good," Malik said. "Important gets remembered." By 6 o'clock, the upstairs dining room had transformed. Soft lighting, expensive place settings, and an air of quiet authority that made even the servers speak in lower voices. The guest list wasn't a list so much as a collection of names that carried weight in the city's shadows. Nia recognized some faces from news clips and whispered conversations. Businessmen whose companies never seemed to struggle, city council members who always voted the right way, lawyers who specialized in making problems disappear, At the center table sat Ryu Dae-hyun. If you'd seen him in a boardroom, you might have assumed he was a CEO. If you'd seen him in a courtroom, you might have assumed he was the defendant with the best lawyers money could buy. If you'd seen him in a church, you might have assumed he was the man who funded the stained glass and never bowed his head during prayer. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His English was fluent and precise, his authority worn like a perfectly tailored suit. No wasted fabric, no unnecessary display. When he spoke, the room leaned in, not because they liked him, but because they understood consequences. Nia served his table with professional distance, placing plates softly, refilling water glasses, keeping her shoulders relaxed and her gaze neutral. She was good at being background. Background kept you safe, kept you employed, kept you invisible to people who might decide you'd seen too much. The conversation at Dae-hyun's table was conducted in the careful language of men who never said exactly what they meant. Contracts became arrangements. Threats became concerns. Violence became necessary adjustments. Nia caught fragments as she moved around the table. The festival announcement needs to happen before November. Madame Ryu wants public legitimacy. The community board is asking questions about the scholarship fund. Questions can be addressed. It was the last comment that made Nia's stomach tighten. She'd grown up in neighborhoods where addressed meant someone got hurt. Around 9 o'clock, as dessert was being served, a woman entered the private dining room with the kind of presence that made conversation pause. She wasn't dressed flashily. Elegant black coat, simple jewelry, but power radiated from her like heat from a fire. Madame Ryu Gyeongja. Nia had never seen her before, but she knew immediately who she was. The way Dae-hyun's posture shifted, the way every man at the table suddenly sat straighter, the way the air itself seemed to thicken with deference and fear. Madame Ryu moved to the head of the table, her gaze sweeping the room like a general surveying a battlefield. When her eyes landed on Nia, they lingered for a moment longer than necessary. "Dae-hyun," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "We need to discuss the timeline." Dae-hyun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The foundation launch is on schedule." "The foundation launch is a performance," Madame Ryu corrected, "and every performance needs the right accompaniment." She gestured subtly toward Nia, who was refilling water glasses at a nearby table. "The girl sings," Madame Ryu continued. "I've heard." Nia's hand stilled on the water pitcher. How could she possibly know that? Dae-hyun's eyes flicked to Nia, then back to his grandmother. "The restaurant staff's personal activities aren't relevant to our business." Madame Ryu's smile was sharp as a blade. "Everything is relevant to our business, grandson, especially voices that carry authenticity." The word authenticity landed like a threat wrapped in silk. Nia finished her task and moved toward the kitchen, but Madame Ryu's voice followed her. "You," she said, not loudly, but with enough command to stop Nia in her tracks. "Come here." Nia's training screamed at her to comply. Customers were always right, especially customers who could end your employment with a phone call. But something deeper, something inherited from her mother's spine and her grandmother's refusal to bow, made her turn slowly and meet Madame Ryu's gaze directly. "Yes, ma'am." Madame Ryu studied her for a long moment. "What's your name?" "Nia Hartwell." "And you sing Nia Hartwell?" The question felt like a trap, but lying felt worse. "I do." "Where?" Nia glanced at Jules, who was hovering nearby with obvious anxiety. "The lounge next door, open mic nights." Madame Ryu's smile widened slightly. "How convenient." Dae-hyun's voice cut through the tension. "Grandmother, perhaps we should what?" Madame Ryu's gaze never left Nia's face. "Miss Hartwell, I'd like to hear you sing." It wasn't a request. Nia felt the weight of every eye in the room. Jules looked like he might faint. Dae-hyun's expression was unreadable, but she caught something in his posture. Not quite protection, but not indifference either. "I don't perform for private parties," Nia said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Madame Ryu's eyebrows rose slightly. "No?" "No, ma'am. I sing next door because that's my space. This is my workplace." The silence that followed was deafening. Nia could practically hear Jules calculating how much this moment was going to cost him. Then Dae-hyun did something unexpected. He stood. "She's right," he said quietly. "This isn't the appropriate venue for a performance." Madame Ryu's gaze shifted to her grandson, and Nia caught a flash of something dangerous in her eyes. "Of course," Madame Ryu said smoothly. "How thoughtless of me." She looked back at Nia. "Perhaps I'll visit your space another time." It sounded like a promise, and a threat rolled into one. The evening wound down with the careful politeness of people who'd just witnessed a power play they didn't fully understand. As the guests began to leave, Nia busied herself clearing tables, trying to process what had just happened. Dae-hyun was the last to leave. As he passed Nia's station, he paused. "The lounge next door," he said quietly. "What time do you usually perform?" Nia looked up from the plates she was stacking. "Why?" "Because I think my grandmother is going to visit whether you want her to or not," Dae-hyun said. "And I think you should know what you're walking into." There was something in his voice, not quite warning, not quite protection, but something that made Nia pause. 10 o'clock, she said finally. "But I don't take requests." Dae-hyun's mouth curved in what might have been a smile. "I wouldn't dream of making one." As he walked away, Nia felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She'd spent her entire adult life being invisible, being safe, being background. Something told her those days were over. The Velvet Note wasn't much to look at, cramped, dimly lit, with a stage barely big enough for a microphone stand and a stool. But it was Nia's sanctuary, the one place in Los Angeles where her voice mattered more than her ability to balance plates or smile through condescension. By 9:30, the usual crowd had gathered. Artists nursing cheap drinks, couples on dates that couldn't afford dinner theatre, and regulars who came for the authenticity that money couldn't buy. Malik was already set up behind the soundboard, adjusting levels with the precision of a surgeon. Nia stood at the bar, sipping water and running through her mental checklist. New song tonight, the one built around her mother's borrowed lullaby, transformed into something that felt like coming home and leaving home at the same time. "You sure about this one?" Malik asked, approaching with his usual pre-show concern. "It's different from your usual set." "Different how?" "More personal, more." He searched for the word. "Vulnerable." Nia nodded. Vulnerable was exactly right. The song pulled from places she usually kept locked away. Childhood memories of her mother humming while braiding her hair, the melody that had no name and no origin story, the sense that some songs carried secrets in their bones. "Sometimes vulnerable is what people need to hear," Nia said. At 9:45, Ryu Dae-hyun walked through the door. He'd changed from his business suit into dark jeans and a simple black sweater, but he still carried himself with the kind of authority that made people notice. He chose a table in the back, ordered a whiskey, and settled in like he belonged there. Nia felt a flutter of nerves that had nothing to do with stage fright. At 10:00, she took the stage. The first song was familiar territory, a jazz standard that let her voice warm up, let the room settle into listening mode. The second was one of her originals, a piece about city life and dreams deferred that always got the crowd nodding along. Then came the new song. Nia closed her eyes and let the melody rise from somewhere deep in her chest. The borrowed lullaby her mother had sung transformed into something that belonged entirely to her. The lyrics spoke of inherited secrets, of songs passed down like heirlooms, of the weight of carrying someone else's story until it became your own. The room went absolutely still. When she opened her eyes, she found Dae-hyun staring at her with an expression she couldn't name. Not appreciation, something deeper, more personal, like recognition. As the last note faded, applause filled the small space, but Dae-hyun didn't clap. He just sat there, his whiskey untouched, his gaze fixed on her face. Nia finished her set with 2 more songs, but she could feel his attention like a weight. When she finally stepped off the stage, he was waiting by the bar. "That song," he said without preamble, "the one about inherited secrets. Where did you learn the melody?" Nia's defenses went up immediately. "Why?" "Because I've heard it before." The words sent a chill down Nia's spine. "That's impossible. My mother..." Your mother what? Nia studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or game playing. All she found was genuine confusion and something that looked like pain. My mother used to sing it to me when I was little, she said carefully. She called it a borrowed song, never said who she borrowed it from. Dae-hyun was quiet for a long moment. What's your mother's name? Colette Hartwell. Nia paused. Why? Before Dae-hyun could answer, the atmosphere in the lounge shifted, conversations quieted, and Nia felt the familiar prickle of being watched by someone who didn't belong. Madame Ryu Gyeongja had arrived. She moved through the cramped space like she owned it, her presence transforming the cozy lounge into something that felt suddenly fragile. Behind her walked a man Nia didn't recognize, tall, severe, with the kind of face that suggested he'd never smiled without calculating the cost. Ryu Seong-gil, Dae-hyun said quietly, following Nia's gaze. My uncle. Madame Ryu approached their table with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in her life. Miss Hartwell, she said, her voice warm enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention. What a lovely performance. Nia stood straighter. Thank you. That last song, so unusual, so familiar. Madame Ryu's eyes glittered, almost like a lullaby. The words hit Nia like a physical blow. I don't know what you mean. Don't you? Madame Ryu pulled out a chair and sat without being invited. Dae-hyun, perhaps you should tell Miss Hartwell about the song your father used to sing. Dae-hyun's jaw tightened. Grandmother, the one he learned from that woman. What was her name? Madame Ryu tapped her finger against her lips in mock thought. Ah, yes, Colette. The lounge seemed to tilt around Nia. How do you know my mother's name? Madame Ryu's smile was razor-sharp. Your mother worked for our family, dear, years ago when you were very small. Nia felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Her mother had never mentioned working for a Korean family, had never mentioned working for anyone who could afford private dining rooms and whiskey that cost more than Nia's monthly rent. That's impossible, Nia said. Is it? Madame Ryu reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph, old, slightly faded, showing a young black woman holding a toddler in what looked like an elegant living room. The woman was beautiful, with the same high cheekbones and determined chin that Nia saw in the mirror every morning. The child in her arms had Nia's eyes. It was definitely her mother, 24 years younger, holding 2-year-old Nia. She was very good at her job, Madame Ryu continued conversationally. Discreet, reliable, until she decided to take something that didn't belong to her. Nia's voice came out as a whisper. What did she take? Madame Ryu's eyes glittered with satisfaction. A recording. A conversation that was meant to remain private. Insurance, she called it, protection against misunderstandings. Dae-hyun leaned forward. What kind of recording? Madame Ryu's gaze shifted to her grandson. The kind that could destroy everything we've built. The kind that could turn legitimacy into liability. She looked back at Nia. Your mother disappeared one night, taking you and that recording with her. We've been looking for it ever since. Nia's mind raced. Her mother had always been secretive about their past, always deflected questions about why they'd moved so much when Nia was little, always seemed to carry a weight that had no name. But this was beyond anything Nia had imagined. I don't know anything about a recording, Nia said. Perhaps not, Madame Ryu agreed, but you know the song. And songs, my dear, can carry more than just melodies. Ryu Seong-gil spoke for the first time, his voice cold and precise. The festival is in 2 weeks. The foundation announcement needs to proceed without complications. Madame Ryu nodded. Indeed, which is why Miss Hartwell is going to help us. I'm not going to help you do anything, Nia said, finding her voice again. Madame Ryu's smile didn't waver. Oh, but you are. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in this city knows exactly what your mother stole from us. I'll make sure she's prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I'll make sure her name becomes synonymous with theft and betrayal. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Nia looked at Dae-hyun, hoping for... What? Support? Protection? But his face was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "What do you want?" Nia asked finally. "Simple," Madame Ryu said. "You're going to perform at the festival. You're going to sing that beautiful lullaby, and you're going to help my grandson present the right image to the community." "And if I refuse?" Madame Ryu's expression hardened. "Then you'll discover that some debts are inherited, Miss Hartwell, and your mother's debt to our family is considerable." As if summoned by the tension, Malik appeared at Nia's side, his protective instincts clearly triggered by the hostile energy radiating from the table. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, but his posture ready for trouble. Madame Ryu glanced at him dismissively. "We're just having a conversation about music, aren't we, Miss Hartwell?" Nia felt trapped between impossible choices. Agree to whatever Madame Ryu wanted, and become a prop in someone else's performance. Refuse, and watch her mother pay the price for secrets Nia didn't even understand. "I need time to think," she said. Madame Ryu stood gracefully. "Of course, but not too much time. The festival is in 2 weeks, and preparations need to begin immediately." As she moved toward the door, she paused next to Dae-hyun. "Walk me to the car," she said. It wasn't a request. Dae-hyun stood reluctantly, but before following his grandmother, he looked back at Nia. "This isn't over," he said quietly, "and it's not what it seems." Then they were gone, leaving Nia standing in the suddenly too quiet lounge with Malik's concerned gaze and 100 questions she didn't know how to answer. "Nia," Malik said carefully, "what the hell was that about?" Nia sank into her chair, the photograph of herself as a toddler still lying on the table, like evidence of a crime she didn't know had been committed. "I think," she said slowly, "I'm about to find out what my mother's been running from all these years." Nia didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table in the small apartment she shared with her mother in mid-city, staring at the photograph Madame Ryu had left behind like a calling card. 2-year-old Nia smiled out from her mother's arms, but there was something in Colette's eyes, a wariness that Nia recognized because she'd inherited it. When Colette emerged from her bedroom at 6 a.m., already dressed for her job at the community health clinic, she found Nia waiting with coffee and questions. "Mum," Nia said, sliding the photograph across the table. "We need to talk." Colette's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, recognition, and finally a bone-deep weariness that made her look every one of her 50 years. "Where did you get this?" she asked, sinking into the chair across from Nia. "Madame Ryu Gyeongja. She came to my show last night." Colette's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. "Oh, baby, oh no." "Mom, what recording were you supposed to have taken?" Colette was quiet for so long that Nia wondered if she was going to answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I was 22, broke, desperate for work that paid enough to matter." She touched the photograph gently. "The Ryu family hired me as household staff, cleaning, cooking, sometimes watching their grandson when he was little. You knew Dae-hyun as a child. Sweet boy, serious even then, always trying to please his grandmother, always falling short." Colette's expression darkened. "I should have left after the first month. Should have known that family's money came with blood on it." Nia leaned forward. "What did you hear?" "Madame Ryu on the phone with someone, a city councilman, I think, planning to have a community organizer killed, a woman named Sarah Kim who was fighting against one of their development projects." Colette's hands shook slightly. "She was going to make it look like gang violence, blame it on territorial disputes." The words hit Nia like ice water. "You recorded it?" "I was cleaning the office, had my old cassette recorder in my pocket. I was learning English, recording myself practicing pronunciation." Colette met Nia's eyes. "When I realized what I was hearing, I just kept recording. Sarah Kim had 2 little girls, baby. I couldn't let them grow up without their mother." "What happened to Sarah Kim?" "She got a phone call that night. Anonymous tip about the threat. She went into hiding, moved her family out of state." Colette's voice cracked. "I saved her life, but I destroyed mine in the process." Nia reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "You did the right thing." "Did I? I've been looking over my shoulder for 24 years. I've kept you moving, kept us hidden, because I was afraid they'd find us." "Mom." Nia's voice was gentle but insistent. "In the photo, I'm 2 years old. But you said you worked there when Dae-hyun was little. How old was he? Colette's eyes widened, as if she'd said more than she intended. He was 8 when I started working there, 10 when we left. So you worked there for 2 years. You were there when I was born. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Mum, who is my father? Colette's breath caught. Nia, is he Korean? Another silence, longer this time. His name was Ryu Jin-hyun, Colette said finally, Dae-hyun's father. The world tilted sideways. Nia felt like she was falling through space, every certainty she'd built her life on crumbling beneath her feet. Dae-hyun is my brother, half-brother. Jin-hyun was married to Madame Ryu's daughter. It was complicated. Complicated. The word felt laughably inadequate for the magnitude of what Colette was revealing. Does he know? I don't think so. You were so little when we left, and Jin-hyun... Colette's voice trailed off. What happened to him? Car accident when you were 3. Colette's eyes were distant, lost in memories. Though Madame Ryu never liked that he'd fallen in love with me, never liked that he was talking about leaving his wife, about starting over with us. Nia felt sick. You think she had him killed? I think Madame Ryu doesn't let people leave her family, not alive. The implications crashed over Nia like a wave. Dae-hyun wasn't just some powerful stranger who'd wandered into her life. He was her brother. And Madame Ryu wasn't just threatening her mother. She was threatening the woman who'd given birth to her own granddaughter. I have to tell him, Nia said. No. Colette's voice was sharp. Absolutely not. Mom, he has a right to know. He has a right to stay alive, Colette interrupted. If Madame Ryu thinks he knows about you, about the recording, about any of this, she'll see him as a liability, and she doesn't let liabilities live. Nia's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Need to see you. Important. DH. It's him, Nia said, showing her mother the screen. Colette's face went pale. Don't answer it. But Nia was already typing back. Where? The response came immediately. Griffith Observatory. Public place. 1 hour. Nia stood up, grabbing her jacket. I have to go. Nia, please. Mom, I can't pretend this isn't happening. Whatever game Madame Ryu is playing, I need to understand the rules. Colette caught her arm. Then take this. She disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a small device. An old cassette recorder, the kind people used in the 1990s. The original recording. I've kept it all these years, hoping I'd never need it. Nia stared at the device. Why are you giving it to me? Because you're stronger than I was at your age, because you have your father's sense of justice and my stubborn streak. And because... Colette's voice broke. Because I'm tired of running. Griffith Observatory sat like a crown on the hills above Los Angeles, offering panoramic views of the city sprawling endlessly in all directions. Nia found Dae-hyun standing at the edge of the parking lot, his back to the view, his attention focused entirely on her approach. He looked different in daylight, younger, more uncertain, the careful control she'd seen in the restaurant replaced by something rawer. Thank you for coming, he said. You said it was important. Dae-hyun nodded toward a bench positioned to overlook the city. Can we sit? They settled beside each other, the October sun warm on their faces despite the cool breeze. For a moment, neither spoke, both seemingly overwhelmed by the weight of everything that had been revealed the night before. My grandmother wants me to marry someone, Dae-hyun said finally. Nia blinked. What? An arranged alliance. The daughter of a family in Seoul. It would strengthen our position, legitimize our business interests. He stared out at the city. The festival announcement isn't just about the foundation. It's about my engagement. And you don't want to marry her? Dae-hyun's laugh was bitter. I've never even met her. But that's not the point. The point is that everything in my life has been decided by other people. Every choice, every relationship, every breath I take has been calculated for maximum benefit to the family. Nia studied his profile. Until now. Until now. He turned to look at her, Last night when I heard you sing that lullaby, it was like remembering something I'd forgotten I'd lost. What do you mean? Daehyun was quiet for a long moment. My father used to sing that song to me when I was little. He said he learned it from someone special, someone who made him remember what love was supposed to feel like. Nia's heart clenched. Daehyun, after he died, my grandmother forbade anyone from singing it, said it was a reminder of weakness, of the kind of sentimentality that got people killed. His voice hardened. But you sang it last night like it belonged to you. It does belong to me, Nia said quietly. My mother sang it to me. Your mother who worked for our family. My mother who loved your father. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Daehyun's eyes widened. What are you saying? Nia took a deep breath. I'm saying that lullaby belongs to both of us. I'm saying your father didn't just learn it from someone special. He learned it from my mother. And I'm saying... She met his gaze directly. I'm saying we're family. Daehyun stared at her for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and something that might have been relief. You're my sister, he said, not as a question but as a statement of fact that was somehow both shocking and inevitable. Half-sister, Nia corrected. But yes. Daehyun leaned back against the bench, his carefully constructed world visibly rearranging itself around this new reality. Does my grandmother know? I think she suspects. Why else would she be so interested in me? Because you're leverage, Daehyun said grimly. Because if I refuse the marriage, if I refuse to play my part in her plans, she can use you to force my compliance. Nia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. How? By threatening the only family I have left. The weight of their situation settled over them like a heavy blanket. They were siblings, but they were also strangers. They shared blood, but they lived in different worlds, and they were both trapped in a web spun by a woman who saw people as chess pieces to be moved around a board. There's something else, Nia said, pulling out the cassette recorder her mother had given her. My mother recorded something years ago, something that could destroy your grandmother's plans. Daehyun looked at the device like it might explode. What kind of recording? Proof that she ordered a murder. A community organizer who was fighting against one of your family's development projects. Sarah Kim, Daehyun said immediately. Nia's eyes widened. You know about her? I know she disappeared suddenly right around the time my father died. I know my grandmother always spoke about her like she was a problem that had been solved. His jaw tightened. I never wanted to know how. Now you do. Daehyun stared out at the city, his hands clenched into fists. If that recording becomes public, your grandmother goes to prison, your family's empire collapses and you're free, and you become a target for every enemy our family has ever made, Daehyun countered. Nia, you don't understand the forces you're talking about unleashing. Then help me understand. Help me figure out how to use this without getting us both killed. Daehyun was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with decisions that would reshape both their lives. The festival, he said finally. If we're going to do this, it has to be at the festival. Public, recorded, impossible to cover up or deny. You want to destroy your own family? I want to save it, Daehyun said. From her, from what she's turned us into. He looked at Nia. But I can't do it alone. Nia thought about her mother's words, about inherited debts and the weight of carrying someone else's secrets. She thought about the lullaby that had connected her to a father she'd never known and a brother she'd just found. What do you need me to do? Daehyun's smile was small but genuine. I need you to sing, he said. But not for her. For us. For the truth. As they sat there planning their rebellion against a woman who'd shaped both their lives from the shadows, Nia felt something she'd never experienced before, the strange comfort of family, complicated and dangerous though it might be. For the first time in her life, she wasn't facing the world alone. If you've been following stories like this one, you know that family secrets have a way of surfacing at the worst possible times. But sometimes, those revelations are exactly what we need to break free from cycles that have held us captive for too long. What would you do if you discovered a sibling you never knew existed? Let us know in the comments below. The next 10 days passed in a blur of careful planning and mounting tension. Nia continued her shifts at Hannock Garden, serving customers and pretending her world hadn't been turned upside down. Dae-hyun attended family meetings and business dinners, playing the role of dutiful grandson while secretly coordinating with Nia to expose the woman who'd controlled his life since birth. They met in public places, coffee shops, parks, the library, always careful to appear casual, always aware that Madame Ryu's network of informants could be anywhere. Slowly, they pieced together a plan that felt both audacious and terrifying. The festival would be their stage, the foundation announcement would be their cover, and the truth would be their weapon. But 3 days before the event, everything went wrong. Nia was closing up at the restaurant when Jules Tanaka approached her with an expression she'd never seen before, fear mixed with barely contained anger. "You need to leave," he said without preamble. "What?" "Now, tonight. Don't come back." Nia's stomach dropped. "Jules, what's going on?" "I got a call this afternoon. Someone very politely explained that employing you had become problematic for my business." Jules's hands shook as he spoke. "They suggested I might want to reconsider your position here." Nia felt the walls closing in. "Who called?" "Does it matter?" The message was clear. "You're fired, Nia. And if you're smart, you'll disappear before they decide that firing you isn't enough." Nia grabbed her purse and jacket, her mind racing. If Madame Ryu was moving against her this directly, it meant the old woman had decided subtlety was no longer necessary. She was halfway to her car when her phone rang. Dae-hyun's number. "They took my uncle," he said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled panic. "What?" "Ryu Seong-gil. He's been arrested. Federal charges, money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy." Dae-hyun's voice cracked. "It's all over the news." Nia's mind raced. "Your grandmother is blaming me, says I've brought unwanted attention to the family, that my associations have compromised our security." Associations, meaning her. "Where are you?" "Safe house, but not for long. She's calling a family meeting tomorrow night. Emergency session to discuss succession." Nia understood immediately. With Ryu Seong-gil in federal custody, Dae-hyun was the only remaining heir. But if Madame Ryu could prove he was unfit, if she could demonstrate that his judgment was compromised, she could justify bypassing him entirely. "She's going to cut you out," Nia said. "Worse, she's going to eliminate the problem entirely." The words sent ice through Nia's veins. I think she's decided that having a grandson is less important than maintaining control." Dae-hyun's voice was steady, but Nia could hear the fear underneath. "Nia, you need to run. Tonight, take your mother and disappear." "No, this isn't negotiable." "You're right," Nia interrupted. "It's not, because I'm not running. Not anymore. Zanya, the festival is tomorrow night. The whole city will be watching. If we're going to do this, it has to be now." Dae-hyun was quiet for a long moment. "If we move against her tomorrow, there's no going back, no second chances, no safe exit." "There's no safe exit anyway," Nia pointed out. "At least this way we go down fighting. We could both end up dead. We could both end up free." Another silence, longer this time. "Meet me at the observatory," Dae-hyun said finally. "Midnight. We'll finalize the plan." But when Nia arrived at Griffith Observatory, she found more than just Dae-hyun waiting for her. Kang Tae-sik stood beside Dae-hyun's car, his usual stoic expression replaced by something that looked almost like regret. "Miss Hartwell," he said as she approached, "I'm sorry." The apology was her only warning before the world went dark. Nia woke up in what appeared to be an elegant living room, hardwood floors, expensive furniture, artwork that probably cost more than she made in a year. Her hands were zip-tied behind her back, but she wasn't gagged or blindfolded. A small mercy that felt more ominous than comforting. Madame Ryu sat across from her in a high-backed chair, looking like a queen holding court. Dae-hyun knelt on the floor beside her, his hands also bound, a cut above his left eye, suggesting he'd put up more of a fight than Nia had managed. "Good," Madame Ryu said as Nia's eyes focused. "Now we can have a proper conversation." Nia tested her bonds, tight but not cutting off circulation, Professional work. Where are we? My home. Where this all began, really. Madame Ryu's smile was serene. Where your mother once worked, where your father once lived, where you took your first steps. The words hit like physical blows. This house, this room, her parents had been here together, had loved each other here, had planned a future that Madame Ryu had destroyed. You killed him, Nia said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. I protected my family, Madame Ryu corrected, from a son who was willing to throw away everything for a woman who meant nothing. She meant everything to him. Madame Ryu's expression hardened. She was a distraction, a weakness, and weakness gets people killed. Daehyun lifted his head, his voice hoarse. Like you got Uncle Shongil arrested? Madame Ryu's gaze shifted to her grandson. Your uncle became greedy, sloppy. He forgot that our survival depends on staying invisible. She stood, moving to a window that overlooked the city lights. The federal investigation was inevitable. I simply expedited the process. You turned him in, Daehyun said, disbelief and horror warring in his voice. I sacrificed one piece to save the board, Madame Ryu replied calmly, just as I'm about to sacrifice two more. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Nia forced herself to think clearly, to push past the fear and focus on their options. The zip ties were tight but not impossible. The room had multiple exits, and somewhere in this house was the recording that could destroy everything Madame Ryu had built. You want the recording, Nia said. Madame Ryu turned back to them. I want many things. The recording, your silence, your disappearance. Her smile was razor-sharp. Fortunately, I can achieve all three with a single solution. You're going to kill us. I'm going to solve a problem that should have been solved 24 years ago. Daehyun struggled against his bonds. She's your granddaughter. She's a mistake, Madame Ryu said coldly. A reminder of my son's weakness. A threat to everything our family has built. And me? Daehyun asked. What's my crime? Madame Ryu's expression softened slightly, almost maternal. Your crime is caring more about strangers than family. Your crime is choosing sentiment over survival. She moved closer, reaching out to touch his face. Your crime is being too much like your father. Daehyun jerked away from her touch. My father was a good man. Your father was a fool who got himself killed for love. Madame Ryu's voice turned sharp. And you're about to make the same mistake. That's when Nia heard it, the faint sound of sirens in the distance growing closer. Madame Ryu heard it too, her head tilting like a predator sensing danger. Expecting company? Nia asked. Madame Ryu's eyes narrowed. What did you do? Insurance, Nia said, allowing herself a small smile. Something my mother taught me. The sirens were definitely getting closer now, and Madame Ryu's composed facade was beginning to crack. Kang Tae-sik, she called. But Kang Tae-sik didn't answer. Instead, footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Malik Rowe appeared in the doorway with what looked like half the LAPD behind him. LAPD, one of the officers shouted. Nobody move! Madame Ryu's face went through a series of emotions, surprise, rage, and finally, a cold calculation that was somehow more terrifying than her anger. You have no authority here, she said calmly to the lead detective. We have a warrant, Detective Sarah Chen replied, holding up the paperwork. Anonymous tip about kidnapping and assault. Nia caught Malik's eye and mouthed, Thank you. He'd obviously been tracking her phone, had called for help when she didn't check in. As the officers moved to secure the scene, cutting Nia and Daehyun's bonds and checking them for injuries, Madame Ryu maintained her composure like a woman who'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. This is a family matter, she said to Detective Chen. A misunderstanding. Kidnapping and assault are criminal matters, Chen replied. Ma'am, you're under arrest. But even as the handcuffs clicked into place, Madame Ryu's eyes found Nia's. This isn't over, she said quietly. You may have won tonight, but you've started a war you can't finish. As they led her away, Nia felt a mixture of relief and terror. They'd survived the immediate threat. But Madame Ryu was right about one thing. This was far from over. The festival was tomorrow night. The whole city would be watching. And now, instead of exposing Madame Ryu's crimes from the shadows, they'd have to do it with her already in custody and her entire network knowing exactly who had betrayed them. "What happens now?" Dae-hyun asked as they gave their statements to the police. Nia looked out the window at the city lights, thinking about her mother's courage, her father's love, and the lullaby that had brought them all together. "Now," she said, "we finish what we started." The Koreatown Cultural Festival transformed the neighborhood into a kaleidoscope of color, sound, and movement. Food vendors lined the streets. Children ran between booths with painted faces and balloon animals, and the air hummed with languages, laughter, and the promise of celebration. But beneath the festive atmosphere, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Madame Ryu's arrest had made the morning news, sending shockwaves through the community and beyond. The official charges were kidnapping and assault, but everyone knew there was more to the story. Rumors swirled about federal investigations, family betrayals, and secrets that reached into the highest levels of city government. Nia stood backstage at the main festival stage, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. The cassette recorder sat in her jacket pocket like a loaded weapon. 24 years of hidden truth waiting to be unleashed. Malik adjusted her microphone one final time, his usual pre-show ritual taking on extra significance today. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. Nia nodded. "More sure than I've ever been about anything. The whole city's watching. News crews, social media, live streaming. Once you do this, there's no taking it back." "Good," Nia said. "Some things shouldn't be taken back." Through the stage curtains she could see the crowd gathering. Families, community leaders, city officials, and scattered throughout, faces she recognized from Madame Ryu's network. They were watching, waiting, probably planning their own response to whatever was about to unfold. Dae-hyun appeared at her side, looking composed despite everything they'd been through in the past 24 hours. He'd spent the morning with lawyers and federal agents, providing testimony that would likely keep Madame Ryu in custody for a very long time. But tonight wasn't about legal proceedings. Tonight was about truth. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready." They walked onto the stage together, siblings united by blood and purpose, facing a crowd that had no idea their world was about to change. Dae-hyun took the microphone first, his voice carrying clearly over the festival noise. "Good evening," he said. "Thank you all for being here tonight, for celebrating our community, our culture, and our shared commitment to building a better future." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. "Tonight we're announcing the launch of the Ryu Foundation, dedicated to supporting education, arts programs, and community development throughout Los Angeles." Dae-hyun's voice was steady, professional. "But before we talk about the future, we need to address the past." The crowd quieted, sensing the shift in tone. "My family has been part of this community for 3 generations. We've built businesses, created jobs, and contributed to the growth of this city." Dae-hyun paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience. "But we've also made mistakes, serious mistakes that have hurt people, destroyed lives, and corrupted the very values we claim to represent." Murmurs began to spread through the crowd. This wasn't the speech anyone had been expecting. "Some of you know my grandmother, Madame Ryu Gyeongja, was arrested last night. What you don't know is why." Dae-hyun's voice grew stronger. "What you don't know is the full extent of the crimes committed in our family's name." Nia stepped forward, taking the microphone as they'd planned. "My name is Nia Hartwell," she said, her voice carrying the same authority she brought to every performance. 24 years ago, my mother worked for the Ryu family. She witnessed something that changed the course of all our lives." Nia pulled out the cassette recorder, holding it up so the cameras could see it clearly. "This recording contains evidence of a murder plot orchestrated by Madame Ryu Gyeongja, a plan to kill Sarah Kim, a community organizer who was fighting against illegal development projects." The crowd erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. "Sarah Kim didn't die," Nia continued, her voice cutting through the noise, "because my mother, Colette Hartwell, risked everything to warn her. But my father, Ryu Jin-yoon, Dae-hyun's father, wasn't so lucky." The revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow. Nia could see reporters frantically taking notes, cameras zooming in on her face, social media feeds lighting up with real-time reactions. Ryu Jin-hyun was killed because he chose love over loyalty, because he refused to be complicit in his mother's crimes, because he tried to protect the woman he loved and the daughter he would never get to meet. Nia's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. Daehyun and I are siblings, we're family, and we're here tonight to break the cycle of violence and corruption that has defined the Ryu name for too long. She pressed play on the cassette recorder. Madame Ryu's voice filled the festival space, crystal clear despite the recording's age. The conversation was damning. Cold, calculated discussion of murder as a business solution, casual planning of violence against an innocent woman. The crowd listened in stunned silence as the recording played. The festive atmosphere transformed into something resembling a courtroom. When it ended, the silence stretched for several heartbeats before exploding into chaos. Reporters surged toward the stage, shouting questions. Community members called out in anger, shock, and disbelief. City officials huddled together, clearly calculating the political implications of what they'd just heard. But Nia wasn't finished. This foundation, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos, will not be built on blood money. It will not be used to whitewash crimes or buy silence. It will be transparent, accountable, and controlled by the community it serves. She turned to Daehyun, who stepped forward to take the microphone back. I am formally transferring control of all Ryu family assets to an independent board, he announced. Every business, every property, every investment will be audited and restructured to ensure they operate legally and ethically. The crowd's reaction was immediate and intense, some applauding, others shouting questions, many simply staring in shock at the magnitude of what was unfolding. Furthermore, Daehyun continued, I am cooperating fully with federal investigators to ensure that everyone responsible for crimes committed in our family's name faces justice. A reporter near the front of the stage shouted a question. What about your own role in the family business? Daehyun's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. I've spent my entire life trying to earn my grandmother's approval, following orders without questioning their moral cost. I can't undo the harm I've enabled, but I can ensure it stops now. Nia stepped closer to him, a gesture of solidarity that the cameras captured and broadcast live across the city. Some of you are wondering why we're doing this, she said. Why we're destroying our own family, exposing our own secrets, risking our own safety. She looked out at the crowd, seeing faces that reflected the diversity and strength of the community her father had died trying to protect. Because family isn't about blood or loyalty or keeping secrets, Nia said. Family is about truth, about protecting the people you love, even when it costs you everything. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. Because my father died believing in something better than what his family had become. Because my mother spent 24 years running from the truth instead of being able to live in it. Because Daehyun and I refused to let fear and violence define our legacy. She paused, letting her words sink in. And because this community deserves better than leaders who see you as obstacles to be eliminated rather than people to be served. The applause that followed was different from the polite recognition that had greeted Daehyun's opening remarks. This was raw, emotional, the sound of people who had been carrying their own secrets and fears, finally hearing someone speak truth to power. As the formal program concluded and the crowd began to disperse, reporters surrounded the stage, federal agents materialized to collect the recording as evidence, and community leaders approached with questions, concerns, and offers of support. But in the middle of the chaos, Nia found herself standing next to Daehyun, both of them watching their old world burn and their new one struggle to be born. No regrets? He asked quietly. Nia thought about her mother, probably watching the news coverage from their apartment, finally free from the weight of secrets she'd carried for decades. She thought about her father, who had died for choosing love over fear. She thought about the lullaby that had connected them all across time and tragedy. No regrets, she said. Malik appeared at her side, grinning despite the intensity of the moment. That, he said, was the most important performance of your life. Nia smiled back. No, she said, looking at Daehyun, at the community leaders approaching with plans and proposals. At the future they were all building together. That was just the opening number, As the festival continued around them, music playing, families celebrating, children laughing, Nia felt something she'd never experienced before, the strange, terrifying, wonderful freedom that came from choosing truth over safety, family over fear, and love over the comfortable lies that had shaped her life. The lullaby her mother had sung, the song her father had loved, the melody that had brought her and Dae-hyun together. It had always been about this moment, about finding the courage to sing your own truth, even when the whole world was listening, especially when the whole world was listening. Years later, Nia stood in the same spot where the Koreatown Cultural Festival had changed everything. But the neighborhood looked different now. Cleaner, brighter, with new murals celebrating community heroes and small businesses thriving under the protection of stronger worker advocacy programs. The Ryu Foundation had become exactly what she and Dae-hyun had promised, a transparent, community-controlled organization that funded education, arts programs, and economic development without strings attached. The federal investigation had led to dozens of arrests and the dismantling of a corruption network that had operated in the shadows for decades. Madam Ryu Gyeongja was serving a life sentence for conspiracy to commit murder, among other charges. Ryu Seong-gil had plea bargained his way to a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony that had brought down 3 city councilmen and a federal judge. And Nia was no longer a waitress. She still sang, more than ever actually. But now she performed at venues across the city, her voice carrying not just melody but message, her story inspiring others to speak their own truths. She'd recorded an album, started a non-profit focused on supporting survivors of family violence, and somehow found time to finish the college degree she'd abandoned years ago. Dae-hyun had transformed too, though his journey had been harder. Rebuilding a life after dismantling everything you'd been raised to value required a kind of courage that few people possessed. But he'd done it, step by step, choice by choice, creating a legitimate business empire focused on sustainable development and worker ownership. They'd grown closer as siblings, bonded by shared trauma and shared purpose. But they'd also learned to be individuals, to build lives that weren't defined by their family's past or their dramatic revelation. Today was special, though. Today marked the 3rd anniversary of what the media had dubbed the Festival Confession, and the community had organized a celebration. Colette stood beside Nia, elegant in a simple blue dress, her face peaceful in a way it had never been during all those years of running and hiding. She'd testified at Madame Ryu's trial, her voice steady and strong as she described the recording that had started everything. The experience had been cathartic, finally allowing her to grieve properly for the man she'd loved and lost. "You ready?" Colette asked, adjusting the microphone stand that Malik had set up on the small stage. Nia nodded. She was going to sing the lullaby, the borrowed song that had become fully hers, the melody that had connected past and present, the tune that had brought a family together across decades of separation and silence. But first, she had something to say. 3 years ago, Nia began, her voice carrying easily over the gathered crowd, I stood on this stage and told you a story about secrets, about family, about the courage it takes to choose truth over comfort. The crowd, larger than the original festival, more diverse, including faces she recognized and many she didn't, listened with the kind of attention that came from people who had lived through transformation themselves. Today, I want to tell you a different story, a story about what happens after you tell the truth, about what you build in the space that secrets used to occupy. She gestured toward the community around them, the thriving businesses, the new community center, the children playing in a park that had been built on land reclaimed from illegal development. You build something better. Not perfect. Nothing human is ever perfect. But honest, accountable, built on a foundation of respect rather than fear. Nia's gaze found Dae-hyun in the crowd, standing with Han Yuri and several community board members, his expression proud and peaceful. You build family, not the kind bound by blood or obligation, but the kind bound by choice and shared values, and the commitment to protect each other's dignity. She looked at her mother, at Malik, at Reverend Isaiah Brooks. at the dozens of people who had become her chosen family over the past 3 years. "And you sing," Nia said, smiling. "You sing the songs that belong to you, the melodies that carry your truth, the harmonies that connect you to everyone who came before and everyone who will come after." She closed her eyes and let the lullaby rise from her chest, the borrowed song that had become a bridge between generations, between cultures, between a painful past and a hopeful future. As her voice filled the space, other voices joined in. Colette's harmony, Dae-hyun's tentative bass line, children who had learned the melody in music classes funded by the foundation, adults who had found their own courage in Nia's story. The song swelled and grew, becoming something larger than any individual voice, becoming the sound of a community that had learned to sing together. When the last note faded, the applause was warm and sustained. But what Nia treasured most was the silence that followed, the comfortable, peaceful quiet of people who had nothing left to hide. Later, as the celebration wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Nia found herself walking through the neighborhood with Dae-hyun, both of them content to move slowly through streets that had become home in ways they'd never expected. "Any regrets?" Dae-hyun asked, echoing the question he'd posed 3 years earlier. Nia considered the question seriously. The past 3 years hadn't been easy. There had been threats from Madame Ryu's remaining allies, legal battles over the family assets, and the constant challenge of building something new while dismantling something old. But there had also been music, family, purpose, and the deep satisfaction that came from living in alignment with your values. "No regrets," she said finally. "You?" Dae-hyun smiled. A real smile, the kind he'd rarely shown during all those years of trying to earn his grandmother's approval. "No regrets," he agreed, "just gratitude." They walked on in comfortable silence, two siblings who had found each other across decades of separation, two people who had chosen truth over safety and discovered that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary. Behind them, the sounds of the festival continued, music and laughter, and the voices of people who had learned to sing their own songs, loudly and without apology. The lullaby that had started it all continued to echo in the evening air, no longer borrowed, no longer secret but fully owned and freely shared, the way the best songs always were. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of courage, family and finding your voice. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe for more tales of love conquering all. And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when your voice shakes. We'll see you in the next story.